Welcome back, Honors. Man, so let's get after it. All right, so I think I stood behind yesterday for about like 15 to 20 minutes talking about a lot of this Mesoamerican native lifestyle kind of stuff with some of our stud members of class like Denahi and Nikki Del Rey now, and Alicia as well. So this stuff just is mind blowing to me. And if you think it's not, I don't think that you're fun whatsoever. Because when we were talking about Chinampas, watching the excitement portrayed by Dan Becker was just one of the best things ever, right? So we left off talking about the Aztecs, right? We were talking about how their ability to, their prophecy, right, of like settling next to Lake Texcoco and seeing the eagle on the cactus with the serpent and the Mexican flag, and they like are going to have to figure out a way to settle on top of this lake, right? Now, in your mind, you would think, let's settle, like really quick. Let's just look this up really quick. In your mind, you would think, oh well, we'll settle next to it, not on it. But that's not what the prophecy said, right? So Tenochtitlan map. So check this bad boy out. They literally settled on top of that lake. That's ridiculous. So on top of the lake, and they would build all these artificial islands and things like that to actually settle on top of. And of course, those things again were known as Chinampas. Now, here we go. And bang. Now, they were made and held in by reed and mud mats, held in by reed walls, anchored in by trees, which we talked about in class, right? Now, this is what they look like in like an artist rendering, right? Now, as you can see, these are the trees that would actually anchor them in, right? And they could take on multiple different types of shapes, be strong enough to hold up small buildings, could do all kinds of stuff. They would use posting and reed walls to keep them in place while the trees grew. And these were actually entire city projects, right? And the infrastructure of the city was absolutely ridiculous. Like, they just kept growing. And by 1517, they were growing at such a rapid rate that they had an empire known as the Mexica Empire that contained anywhere from 5 to 6 million people. That's like in the neighborhood of Rome at, well, yeah, in the neighborhood of Rome at its height, right? Now, granted, Rome controlled many more people than that, but still, I mean, like, you're talking about two continents where their population density is not much whatsoever. So controlling that many people is ridiculous. And some people always ask, well, like, wait a minute. It's 5 to 6 million people. You're telling me that somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 million of those people couldn't have figured out a way to revolt and like kind of fight back? Well, a lot of it has to do with the way the Aztec society was organized. They developed a feudal type system, right? So they had nobles at the top, workers in the middle, and conquered peoples at the bottom. Now, the conquered peoples at the bottom were forced to pay taxes and donate people for religious sacrifice, right? Which led to a lot of conquered tribes to begin to hate the Aztecs with a fiery, fiery passion. Underline that hate right there. Maybe circle it one time because it is very important to remember, all right? Now, another thing about the Aztecs, of course, has to do with their military technology. Now, something you need to know about all Mesoamerican, all peoples of the native areas, they lacked two key things, and I think we talked about this in class already. They lacked the ability to forge metal. Some historians claim that there was some early bronze smelting and some other like metal forging going on in certain areas of these like two continents, the North and South America. However, it was not mass, like it wasn't like a very, very large industry at all, right? So they were still using primitive tools, right? And they also didn't know how to domesticate animals because they didn't have any animals for domesticating. And when I say didn't domesticate animals, they domesticated like dogs and things like that, but they didn't have any large beasts of burden, all right? The only ones that we'll talk about the only ones the Incas had again. Now, this is actually also another advantage the Aztec had, obsidian weapons. I know Dean is freaking out right now. That right there is an obsidian sword developed by the Aztecs, and it gave them the ability to just wreck house and destroy people in their way, right? Because most of your other native tribes are using sticks, clubs. The Incas, we'll talk about, had a weapon that was very their own in a little bit, but that's about all they had. Whereas the Aztecs had figured out a way to craft volcanic glass, obsidian rock, and actually notch it into wood, creating almost like a chainsaw blade sword. And you can actually see it right. Whoop, you can see it right here as well. They're actually carrying their obsidian swords. So that gave them the ability to take over large numbers of people at once. But who's going to decide the ruler, right? A lot of people always ask, well, it's like, all right, so if they believe that their ruler is, probably a part of their religious system, they are a theocratic system, by the way. Who's going to decide the ruler? Well, they're elected by a council of nobles, priests, and military leaders, particularly the priests, though, right? And it is a dynastic system. When one person dies, the next person's son is supposed to take the throne, okay? This did lead to some political illegitimacy crises, some different wars between the Aztecs actually waged over who would be won. The Incas had an entire civil war that actually was waged between them to decide who was going to be their next ruler at one point. Now, they also built grand stone temples, much in the Mayan style, to the gods, and also built huge apartment-style buildings for people to live in. The Aztecs are phenomenally, amazing people. Had a written language, had a calendar, had, artificial man-made structures, right, for, farming on top of lakes, had weaponry that the rest of the continent didn't have. Imagine for a moment that they had iron. What could they have done? You know what I mean? They would have done amazing things. Hypothetically speaking, that year 1517, back on the last slide, is a very significant year because that's the year that the Spanish arrived, all right? So the year that the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Mexican Empire, right? So by that point, imagine if they had had iron. It would have been insanely different, right? They could have maybe came over and taken over Europe. Who knows, right? So that kind of takes over our Central America area. North America also, far North America, of course, had a lot of different nomadic style tribes like Cherokee, Lenape, Shawnee, the Sioux, the Plains Indians, the Apache. All those were semi-nomadic people, though. Jot that down somewhere in the North America stuff. Now, South America, though, very different on the other hand. Now, there is one group of people we don't know much about, and they're called the Nazcas, right? Now, the Nazcas, the only thing that we really know much about them at all are these giant things they would make called geoglyphs, right? And this is what they looked like. Huge man-made structures to look like a large animal from space, right? So, it's ridiculous. We have no idea how they made them, but that's about all we know about them, right? The Nazcas, they also created, big hilled areas, it's one's called the Serpent, and they were movers of earth, right? But we don't know a ton about their people, but we do know a lot about these people, the Inca, right? Now I harp on the Aztecs and the Inca specifically because those are the people that in Western civilization are going to collide with, right? The Spanish are going to collide with the Aztecs and the Incas the most severely, right? So they're going to rise to their height by about 1400 AD, right? They are phenomenally different than the Aztecs, right? They're so different than the Aztecs. And we're going to talk about some commonalities between them. You need to ask me something in class so we can discuss it, but wait until the end, all right? So they're going to rise to their height until around 1400 AD. They're set in the Andes Mountains, which is in present-day Peru, right? Their empire was about 1,200 miles long from about Peru to Chile and contained over 12 million people. Huge, massive, massive area. Also, imagine for a moment that the Incas and the Aztecs had united. That would have been ridiculous as well, if only, if only. Now, they did not trade, though. This is a really interesting thing about the Incas. Did not trade because the king organized community efforts to feed the people. They kept themselves culturally isolated from the Aztecs, which is just a shame. You know what I mean? They had a road system that spanned the entire empire, over 14,000 miles. And also, crazy thing about the Incas, they never invented the wheel. They had roads, but never actually invented the wheel. They used something else to move things. Stupid, terrible camel cousin of an animal. No, I don't feel bad about saying that, all right? Speaking of never inventing the wheel, they also never invented a written language, all right? So this is the only thing that we believe they use to communicate with in systems of numbers, all right? So they're called quipus, right? Quipus, Q-U-I-P-U. And actually, it's a series of knots tied onto strings that we still don't know exactly how to read, right? So, but yeah, they never actually invented written language or the wheel, but they had one of the biggest empire in all of North and South America, right? So this, of course, is a very emblematic city for them. It is their heavenly religious city. It's called Machu Picchu, right? And it's a very good example of showing them their ability to kind of live atop the mountains, set in the Andes Mountains, right? Now, I want to go there so bad. Now, the government built over 14,000 miles of roads through the mountains that connected the cities to the empire. Now, here's the crazy part about it, though. Tell me that, like, it doesn't just sound like the Aztecs had like 50% of Rome was, and then the Inca had about 50% of what Rome was, and they just couldn't get it together, right? Like, sorry, I just think they're so cool. Now, they also, this is really neat. They use, some of you are like, well, wait a minute. All right, we talked about the Aztecs and how they like built artificial islands that were on top of lakes, which is crazy. Don't get me wrong. But how do you farm on a mountain? Like, so it's steep, it's rocky. What are you supposed to do? How are the Inca going to do this? This is shenanigans. History isn't real. Now, they actually are going to do something a little bit different to all the naysayers out there. They're going to farm on steeps of land, all right? They're going to use a steep system, which is terraces that are not just cut into the mountain to make fields for farming. It looks like a stair step, right? Looks just like this. This is actually a system that some Italians had come up with during their time in Europe, right? Terracing is where you literally grade it over top to make a flat surface and then make a little wall, and then grade it again and make a little, stupid llama, make a little wall, and then like grade it up and make a little wall. And so that way, some historians believe that they never had to invent the wheel because of this, right? Because what are you going to do? You're going to roll a wheeled cart down like this? No, you're going to actually just kind of move up it, like using some type of camel, stupid hairy thing. Ugh. Now, anyway, they were the first people to perform successful surgeries on people's brains and use anesthetics. Well, not on their brain, but on like their cranium, right? There actually is documented success of Incas actually using primitive tools and surgical tools and like anesthetics to actually knock a patient out and like relieve pressure on the brain, right? Like, so to keep people alive, simple surgeries, like way more advanced. Anesthetics, by the way, is a chemical that has rendered the human body unconscious or unresponsive. Now, so the fact that they had things that the Europeans didn't even have at the time is just absolutely mind-blowing, right? So continuing forward, though, this is the last thing we got to talk about then. We will bring these guys back up again, but I just wanted to take 2 seconds to talk about their cultural stuff, right? Now, commonalities between all of these people. The Maya, the Aztec, the Inca kind of, like, they didn't have all these things, but they had some of them. The big commonalities between all of them, though. One theocratic male ruler. Nobles were military leaders and handled government business. The majority of the people are farmers. They're polytheistic, and they believe in human sacrifice, right? So that's a big one, all right? Human sacrifice has kind of always painted these people as being terrible, right? And so, like, and gave the Spanish the reason and the just cause to go in there and take them over. Well, we need to talk about the difference between how they human sacrificed in class on Monday. Don't forget to ask me, all right? So, like, be like, hey, you said you were going to talk about the difference between Incan and Aztec sacrifice, right? So we will talk about that. And then another cool thing was called Pactapac, which was a sport that we'll talk about on Monday as well, which the Mayans and the Aztecs actually shared, which I, again, believe kind of adds more credence to the fact that they were probably relatives culturally of some type, right? The Mayans probably didn't disappear. Maybe they just turned into Aztecs, hypothetically. So, but that's about it. I think that's the last thing, or nope, that's the last. Oh, wait, nope, that's the last thing. Oh, God, oh, yeah. All right, so that right there is Pactapac, right? So, and it's actually a very, very cool game that we'll talk about on Monday a little bit, and that's where we're going to end it, all right? I don't want to give away all the human sacrifice pictures just yet, all right? So, I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend. I hope that that was good for y'all to kind of take 2 seconds to talk about these people culturally, just to kind of know them, understand them a little bit, and then we'll get into it. We're going to bring them back up again when the Spanish and the Aztecs and the Spanish and the Inca actually collide into one another. So we'll talk about that starting on Monday. I'll see you guys then. Have a great weekend.